Hi, my name is Ankit and I'm a student at Fraser University in Canada. Today I would like to present to you our research that we did with using physical activity data from fitness trackers during physiotherapist and arthritis patient conversations. So let me start with some context. So if you look at research from previous years in the medical sciences, research has shown that physical activity can reduce pain and fatigue, it can improve mobility, and overall quality of life can be improved with physical activity. However, if physical activity is overdone, it can increase pain and swelling, which can result in decrease in physical activity. So, for people who have arthritis, it is required that they maintain their physical activity within certain physical activity levels. Researchers have also used physical activity tracking devices in these physical activity interventions. Early researchers used, or early studies used pedometers, which count the number of steps that a patient takes during the day. Uh, Later on, with the advent of fitness trackers such as Fitbit or Jawbone, researchers have also looked into using fitness tracker devices uh, during these physical activity interventions. A difference between pedometers and fitness trackers such as Fitbit is that fitness trackers also track the intensity of physical activity, which the pedometers did not. And this information can be useful when you want to see whether patients are performing moderate to vigorous levels of physical activity for a given period of time. Let's talk a little bit about the fitness trackers that are available in the market today and their design. So if you look at the design of most of these fitness trackers, they are typically designed for individuals who would not generally have any mobility impairments. The idea is more is better. So the more physical activity that you do, the higher your reward, or higher your virtual reward in these devices or their apps. However, this model does not work for patients who have arthritis or any other sort of mobility impairments. The idea more is better does not always work for them because, for example, in case of arthritis patients, uh, doing too much exercise can actually be harmful for their health. And the physical activity ability actually differs quite widely from patient to patient. And therefore, the matrix provided by these devices by default is not suitable for them. And so, uh, now that we have some context, I can talk about what FitViz is. So, we created FitViz with a few goals. The first goal was to be able to provide objective measurement of what we call bouts and non-sedentary hours for patients and clinicians. I'll talk about what bouts are in a minute. We also wanted to facilitate a data-driven communication between patients and arthritis patients. And finally, we wanted uh, to be able to support patients and physiotherapists so that the physical activity goals or any kind of goal setting that they do can be personalized based on their physical activity abilities. So on the right, what you see is a very high level overview of what the application looks like. So it consists of uh, a physical activity planning component where the patients and clinicians would work together to find a physical activity plan which suits the needs of the patient. The patient wears their Fitbit device on their wrist, and we collect their Fitbit data using the Fitbit's web API. So the data extraction algorithm component that you see on the diagram is basically what takes the physical activity plan and the fitness data from the Fitbit devices and then creates personalized visualizations or personalized detection of bouts and non-sedentary hours for the patients. What you see now is the visualization that we generate based on the physical activity plan and the patient's physical activity data. So the green bars that you see on the visualization are what we call as bouts. So these are sessions of physical activity which the patient has performed with a minimum recommended intensity for a minimum recommended duration. On these green bars, we also indicate when we think that the patient has overdone their physical activity. So the heat lines on the top that you see, those are to indicate that the intensity with which the physical activity session was done was too high. Next, we have these sweat drops, which indicate to the patient and the physiotherapist that the duration of this bout was too long. And then finally, we visualize a spring between two physical activity sessions using a zigzag line here. That is to convey that the two sessions of physical activity took place too close to each other. In other words, the patient did not take a sufficient break between those two physical activity sessions. Finally, on the bottom, what we have is their sleep visualization and these walking icons which tell whether the patient was non-sedentary during a given hour. Apart from the visualization, we also have some goals visualized on the right hand side. So first you have activity session target, which is basically the total number of bouts that a patient is expected to perform in a day. The second is non-sitting hour target. So the clinicians and patients would set a target of non-sedentary hours. So in this case, they wanted the patient to be non-sedentary for at least 6 hours in a day. And then finally, they have the steps goal, which is the same as what they would see on their Fitbit devices or their apps. Additionally, there is a little date selector and some basic filtering if you want it, if the user wants to filter out certain visualizations out or certain components out of the visualization. So now let's talk about the physical activity planning or the goal setting piece. So for a physiotherapist, what they see on their when they log into the application is this physical activity plan for any given patient, and what this allows them to do is set 8 different parameters which correspond to different aspects of the physical activity, and as they move these sliders which would change these parameters, they can see how the visualization would change for a given patient. And this is how the patients and physiotherapists would set goals, by looking at what parameters would make sense for them so that they don't end up overdoing or underdoing physical activity. So let me come to the study protocol now. So we had 20 arthritis patients, 10 of whom had rheumatoid arthritis, and the other 10 had osteoarthritis. And these 20 patients were supported by 7 physiotherapists. So the study began with an initial orientation and goal setting session where the patients were introduced to the idea of bouts and non-sedentary hours and why they are important, followed by an initial goal setting session where a physiotherapist looked at their last 7 days of data and set certain goals for them. This was followed by a 1 month study where uh, patients wore their Fitbit devices, and they had, during this duration, they had 2 phone consultations. So every 2 weeks they received a phone call from their physiotherapist where the patient and the physiotherapist looked at the data together to review their performance over the last 2 weeks, and if the current goals were working for the patients. They also looked at how they also looked at the patterns of physical activity and how these patients can incorporate more physical activity into their daily life to meet their physical activity goals without causing them too much pain. Uh, at the end of the 1 month period, the patients and the physiotherapists were interviewed. Uh, the interviews with the patients have been analyzed and have been published previously. In this paper or in this talk, I'll be talking about our analysis of the interviews with the physiotherapists. So after we analyzed the interviews with the physiotherapists, we found 3 major themes. The first theme that we found was around the use of objective data to enhance patient-physiotherapist communication. So the physiotherapist reported uh, 2 ways in which the physiotherapist communication with the patient has changed, or they observed changed, when they compared it to their conversations outside the study. The first thing that happened was that the communication became patient driven. So instead of being directive, where the physiotherapist tells the patient what activities to do without taking into account their current lifestyle, the presence of data allowed the physiotherapists to have conversations around what the patients expected, uh, or the kinds of activities that the patients expected to do. The second thing that happened was that the communication became personalized. So if the physiotherapists don't have any data, then what they can do is give general guidance or general advice and recommend specific exercises. Now that they had the data, they were looking at the existing physical activity patterns of the patient and provide guidance around ways to increase physical activity using activities that they were already doing. So in that sense, the guidance that the patients were now getting from their physiotherapists was personalized. The second theme that we discovered was around goal setting. So the physiotherapist reported that their goal setting with their patients became now data driven, just by the fact that now they had the data to set their goals. In absence of data, they have to rely on subjective feedback from the patients, uh, their recollection of how much activity they have done in the last 2 weeks or a month. Instead of relying on that, they can now look at the actual data, which meant that any communication that they had around goal setting was based on the performance of the patient. The goals were now also realistic because uh, the physiotherapists were able to take into account how the patient was performing with respect to their previous goals, and often they found that the initial goals, the first goals that they set on day one of the study, were often not ideal. Uh, However, since they had the data, it allowed them to iterate over these goals every 2 weeks until they can get until they can refine the goals uh, to suit what the patient was able to do. and was able to kind of meet uh, without too much trouble. Finally, we also found a theme where physiotherapists expressed that their patients were feeling guilty when they were not able to meet 100% of their goals. So this combination of objective data plus perceived commitment to their physiotherapists created a sense of accountability. So uh, now that the patients had their data in front of them, uh, they were able to see how much physical activity they were actually doing and measure their performance with respect to the goals that they had set. Now, since they set the goals with their physiotherapists, uh, there was a sense of accountability, and if when they were not able to achieve those goals, it caused a feeling of guilt, which the physiotherapists observed. And when they observed this, several of the physiotherapists reported that they uh, provided motivational support to their patients, and allowed them, or encourage them to realize that even if they make partial progress towards their goals, that's a positive thing and they should not feel bad about it. But that is something that we observed even in patient interviews, and so we think this is something that is a cause for concern when using physical activity data from fitness devices in health settings. And I think that kind of presents us with a challenge and an opportunity as researchers and designers to think of ways in which we can alleviate this guilt. So a quick summary about our work. So uh, we show that, or we found that the data the default format in which the data is presented by the most consumer level fitness trackers is not suitable for patients with mobility issues. Uh, the use of objective data supports patient physiotherapist communication in new ways, but it also has a risk of inducing negative feelings of guilt among those patients. And finally, the successful use of these devices for managing physical activity requires that the information provided these devices can be personalized. So that's something that we think that we can take into account in our future work, and other researchers can take into account in their future work as well. Uh, that's it from me. Thank you. If you have any questions, please email me at aga53@sfu.ca. Looking forward to hear from you guys. Thank you.